It was the kind of night that felt small and ordinary, the kind of night where laughter spilled from bars, where college friends walked home together, where smartphones glowed in the dark as plans were changed and remade. But somewhere between the student parties and the quiet dorm rooms, a single life slipped from sight like a candle snuffed in a gust of wind. The disappearance of Hannah Elizabeth Graham on the night of September 12 to 13, 2014, would not only shatter one family, it would send shock waves through a college town, unravel a community's sense of safety, and expose a trail of violence that investigators would be piecing together for years. Please help this channel grow, like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. Tonight we tell the full story, who Hannah was, where she went the night she vanished, the evidence that led police to a suspect, the search that followed, and the court proceedings that eventually delivered an answer and left behind a long, raw ache. This is a chronicle of a real life interrupted, a mystery turned tragedy, and the weary, searching work of justice. Be warned, this story is emotional, sometimes difficult, and always human. Hannah Elizabeth Graham was 18 years old when she disappeared. A second-year student at the University of Virginia, she was described by friends and family as vivacious and talented, a top student, an athlete who had played varsity softball, a young woman who loved her school and her friends. She had moved to Charlottesville to study and build a life. She was the sort of student the university prided itself on, and to her family she was simply Hannah, their daughter, full of potential. Charlottesville itself is a city threaded through with history. The brick-lined downtown mall, the iconic University Rotunda, the sleepy neighborhood stretching outward from campus. For many students, the town feels safe, familiar. On the night of September 12, 2014, the city hummed with typical college energy parties, late-night food, music, and the casual movement of students between venues. It was under that normalcy that Hannah's last known movements took place, and the ordinary context makes what happened next feel especially cruel. That night, Hannah and friends socialized on and off campus. Surveillance footage and witness accounts later placed her in the downtown mall area late into the night and in the early morning hours. At around 1:30 a.m., images capture a young woman walking near the mall. At later times she is seen on surveillance video again, alive and alone, until the trail grows cold. These pieces of footage would become the skeleton of the investigation. Small, grainy fragments of a life before it went missing. Into that thread walked a man who would become central to the story. Jesse Leroy Matthew Jr., a 32-year-old at the time, Matthew was later identified by witnesses as the man seen with Hannah the night she vanished. He was not a college student. He worked as a nursing assistant and was, on paper, an ordinary adult in the town, an appearance that would later be shattered by evidence linking him to violent crimes. To construct what happened the night Hannah vanished, investigators and reporters would later stitch together a timeline from surveillance cameras, witness interviews, and phone records. The last confirmed sighting of Hannah came in the early morning hours of September 13. She had been downtown, and at roughly 1:30 a.m. her path is captured by a camera. Later, at about 1:45 to 2 a.m., surveillance footage and witness accounts placed her near Tempo Restaurant and the downtown mall area with an older man identified as Jesse Matthew. Some witnesses reported seeing Hannah appear unsteady on her feet. Others would later dispute whether she had been served alcohol at a particular establishment that night. The details, the exact words exchanged, the precise moment she left one spot and walked toward another would become central points of scrutiny and argument as the investigation unfolded. On paper, the movement of two people leaving a crowded late-night spot is unremarkable. In practice, that small movement would become the hinge upon which an entire case turned. At some point after those last images, Hannah stopped being seen. Her phone stopped communicating. Texts went unanswered. Friends and family, anxious when her absence stretched, reported her missing. What began as a desperate, frantic search among friends and volunteers would grow into a formal criminal investigation as police pieced together the last known movements and looked for any trace of what had happened after those surveillance images. Because the initial trail was based largely on CCTV footage and witness accounts, the early hours of the investigation were equal parts hope and frustration. Footage could only show so much. Phones could be silent for short stretches of time. But every grainy frame, every eyewitness recollection, every ping on a cell tower was a clue the detectives could not afford to ignore. When someone goes missing, the first priorities are swift. Secure the scene, preserve evidence, canvass witnesses, and create a timeline. In Hannah's case, police and volunteers combed the downtown mall and surrounding neighborhoods, searching for signs. A crucial early development came when witnesses identified the man who had been seen with Hannah in the surveillance images. Their identification focused attention on Jesse Matthew, who notably had earlier connections to the Charlottesville area. Once Matthew was named as a person of interest, the pressure intensified. On September 24, 2014, police announced an arrest warrant for Matthew on a charge of abduction with intent to defile. Authorities said they had reason to believe he had abducted Hannah, and public statements urged anyone with information to come forward. Matthew briefly went to the Charlottesville police station with family days later, but left after asserting his rights and asking for a lawyer. Matthew disappeared from view for a short period before he was located sleeping on a remote stretch of beach in Galveston, Texas. He was arrested there and returned to Virginia to face charges. The arrest in Texas was a significant break in the case, but it was only the beginning. As investigators dug deeper, they tied him to other violent incidents, and grim connections began to surface, linking Matthew to at least one other unsolved case years earlier. Once Matthew was back in custody, prosecutors began to assemble the case. Investigators reviewed hours of surveillance footage, examined phone records, and processed forensic evidence. Some pieces of evidence were not immediately made public. Prosecutors and law enforcement moved cautiously, balancing the need to build a solid case with the public's demand for information. In October 2014, nearly 6 weeks after Hannah's disappearance, police announced the discovery of human remains at an abandoned property about 10 miles from Charlottesville. Those remains would later be positively identified as Hannah Graham. The discovery turned a missing person disappearance into a homicide investigation. As the case progressed, the scope widened. Investigators re-examined evidence from earlier cold cases looking for connections, particularly the 2009 disappearance and murder of Virginia Tech student Morgan Harrington. While definitive links would take time and further forensic work to establish, the pattern was chilling enough for detectives and the public to brace for more revelations. The prosecution's work in high-profile homicide cases often involves a strategic balancing act. Disclose enough information to justify charges, but control the release of sensitive forensic details to preserve the integrity of the investigation and potential trials. In Hannah's case, prosecutors initially charged Jesse Matthew with abduction and then upgraded the charges as more forensic information came to light. At various stages, the Commonwealth's attorneys discussed whether to seek the death penalty, a possibility that would underscore the seriousness of the allegations and the potential aggravating factors. The decision-making process driven by the discovery of new forensic evidence and legal counsel's weighing of strategic outcomes would be one of many negotiations in the months and years of litigation that followed. Publicly, some evidence remained sealed to protect other investigations and the identities of potential witnesses or victims. This secrecy sparked both frustration and understanding in the community. Families and friends wanted answers and transparency, but prosecutors argued that revealing too much could compromise trial strategy or the privacy of other victims. For a grieving family, that legal caution can feel like a delay. For investigators, it can be the only way to secure a conviction that will finally deliver a measure of accountability. In March 2016, after protracted legal maneuvers and investigations, Jesse Matthew entered guilty pleas in connection with multiple crimes, including the deaths of Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington. Facing the weight of forensic evidence, and after negotiations that prosecutors said would spare the victims' families the ordeal of a lengthy trial, Matthew pleaded guilty to charges that would ensure he would spend the remainder of his life behind bars. The plea agreement avoided the death penalty and the need for a jury trial in the murder cases. The legal resolution was absolute in one crucial sense. Matthew would not walk free. He received multiple life sentences for the offenses, ensuring that his interaction with society had ended. But legal closure is not the same as emotional closure. For Hannah's family, friends, and an entire campus community, nothing could bring back the bright, ordinary life that was cut short. The plea brought an end to years of public uncertainty, but it also forced families to relive painful testimony and evidence in the public record, a process that is both necessary and devastating. The disappearance and murder of Hannah Graham left scars that would not simply fade when a courtroom pronounced a sentence. The University of Virginia, its students, and the Charlottesville community experienced a period of collective soul-searching. Students and parents scrutinized nightlife safety, bars and restaurants faced questions about service and monitoring of intoxicated patrons, and the university grappled with the reality that danger can exist even in familiar places. Media coverage scrutinized not only the crime but also how institutions responded, and national conversations about campus safety, victim advocacy, and criminal justice were amplified by Hannah's story. Hannah's family engaged in the slow, private work of grieving and advocacy. They, like many families of victims, became a face of a broader movement, demanding better protections, more thorough investigations, and clearer communication from institutions that often seem unprepared to respond to tragedy. The search for answers in the weeks after Hannah's disappearance also showed the power of community. Volunteers, students, and neighbors spent countless hours searching fields, woods, and roadways, driven by a collective need to help. Their efforts were a testament to solidarity even amid heartbreak. At the same time, the case raised questions about policing, evidence preservation, and the balancing of transparency versus investigatory secrecy. Law enforcement emphasized that forensic analysis can take time and that careful, sometimes secret, work is often necessary to build a robust prosecution. For the public, learning to live with the tension between patience in the pursuit of justice and the desire for immediate answers became part of the aftermath of this case. When a life ends prematurely, the personal details resurface as small, painful lodestones. Friends remembered Hannah's laugh, her commitment to schoolwork, her love for the softball field. Her parents in public statements and interviews spoke of their daughter with the sort of tenderness that made headlines feel small and clinical. "She loved it here," people said of her life at UVA. "It's what makes this so hard," they would later add. The personal stories, the inside jokes, the unfinished plans are what make the loss real to those who did not know Hannah personally. They remind us that news accounts and legal documents can never fully capture the human being at the center of the story. For classmates, a campus that once felt carefree became a place of memorials and muted footsteps. Candles, quiet vigils, and informal shrines appeared in the days and weeks after Hannah vanished. The rawness of grief was public. Students shared stories and photos, and the university community gathered to support the family and each other. That kind of public mourning can be both consoling and excruciating, a reminder that lives are fragile and that the routines of youth can be interrupted without warning. In the quiet after the headlines, when the television vans had left and the courthouse doors were closed for the day, the simplest, most human thing remained: a mother and father without their daughter, friends without their companion, a university without one of its students. The legal system did its work, but slow, meticulous, and sometimes opaque, and it produced convictions that ensured the man charged would never harm another. But justice, however complete in the legal sense, cannot mend the missing pieces of a life. Hannah Graham's story is a reminder of how fragile safety can be, how quickly routine nights can become unimaginable losses, and how communities must do the hard work of caring for one another. It is a call to vigilance not in a way that breeds fear, but in a way that fosters responsibility. To notice when someone looks vulnerable, to speak up when something feels wrong, and to demand systems that protect the young and the vulnerable. If there is a lingering thought to carry away from this chronicle, it is this: the face on the missing person poster was not simply a case file. She was Hannah, a daughter, a teammate, a friend, and while we can never bring her back, we can remember her by the way we treat one another in the smallest, most ordinary moments. That, perhaps, is the only true way to honor a life gone too soon.